Hari. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramhamsa Parivarajakaacharya Athotarshata His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupada Paramhamsa Parivarajakaacharya Ashtotarshata Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Gaur Premanande. All glorious assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious Shri Guru and Gauranga Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 31, verse number 10. Ārabhya saptamān māsāt labdha-bodho vepitaḥ naikatrāste sūti-vātair viṣṭhā-bhūr iva sodaraḥ ārabhya saptamān māsāt labdha-bodho vepitaḥ naikatrāste sūti-vātair viṣṭhā-bhūr iva sodaraḥ ārabhya saptamān māsāt labdha-bodho vepitaḥ naikatrāste sūti-vātair viṣṭhā-bhūr iva sodaraḥ ārabhya saptamān māsāt labdha-bodho vepitaḥ naikatrāste sūti-vātair viṣṭhā-bhūr iva sodaraḥ naikatrāste sūti-vātair viṣṭhā-bhūr iva sodaraḥ labdha-bodho vepitaḥ viṣṭhā-bhūr iva sodaraḥ ārabhya saptamān māsāl viṣṭhā-bhūr iva sodaraḥ. Mataji. ārabhya saptamān māsāl ārabhya, beginning. Saptamāt māsāt, from the 7th month. Labdha-bodhaḥ, endowed with consciousness. Api, although. Vepitaḥ, tossed. Na, not. Ekatra, in one place. Āste, he remains. Sūti-vātair, by the winds for childbirth. viṣṭhā-bhūr, the womb. Iva, like. Sa-udaraḥ, born of the same womb. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Translation. Thus endowed with the development of consciousness from the 7th month after his conception, the child is tossed downward by the airs that press the embryo during the weeks preceding delivery, like the worms born of the same filthy abdominal cavity. He cannot remain in one place. Purport. At the end of the 7th month of the child is moved by the bodily air and does not remain in the same place. For the entire uterine system becomes slackened before delivery. The worms have been described here as Sodara. Sodara means born of the same mother. Since the child is born from the womb of the mother and the worms are also born of fermentation within the womb of the same mother, under the circumstances, the child and the worms are actually brothers. We are very anxious to establish universal brotherhood among human beings, but we should take into consideration that even the worms are our brothers. What to speak of other living entities? Therefore, we should be concerned about all living entities. Thus ends the purport. Om ajnana-timirandasya ajnananjana-shalakaya chakshur unmilitam ena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Vivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this verse is basically describing what happens to the embryo in the 7th month after the conception. And it is said here, the first one is labdha-bodhaḥ. Labdha-bodhaḥ means endowed with consciousness. Bodha basically it comes from the same word as buddhi, the same root word as buddhi, so they have the similarity. Buddhi basically means intelligence, but here in this context bodhaḥ, it refers to consciousness. And here it says labdha-bodhaḥ, means it has endowed with more developed consciousness in the 7th month. And after that what happens? Naikatrāste. Naikatrāste means it starts moving. It cannot stay in one place, because previously the embryo is kind of like fixed in one place. But now after it is endowed with this consciousness, it does not remain in one place, but it starts moving. Especially it tries to move downwards so that it's ready for the delivery, right? Because that's what happens, right? So when a person is more conscious, then he cannot sit in one place, right? Let's say we are sleeping, the consciousness is low, we just remain in one place. But when we wake up, we start moving. We cannot just sit in one place, right? So that's what happens. Once the embryo here is endowed with consciousness, it starts moving. And there are airs, that are pressing the embryo downwards. Right? That's what it is said. Sūti-vātair, by the winds of childbirth. So basically, we all know that there are 4 types of suffering. What are the 4 types of suffering? Janma, Mrityu, and Jara, Vyadhi, right? Birth, death, old age, and disease. And in the previous chapter, chapter number 30, we discussed about the old age and the disease and the death. How these things are very painful and it's suffering, right? And we discussed about how a materialistic person, how in his old age gets diseased, and how he is mistreated by his own family members, and how ultimately he meets death, and after death also there's a lot of suffering due to hellish punishments and all those things, right? So, but in the current chapter we are discussing about birth as suffering. Generally speaking, everybody accepts that old age, disease and death is suffering, but not everybody sees birth as a suffering. Birth is seen as something joyful, right? When a child is born in a family, everybody celebrates, right? Nobody suffers, right? But if right? But if a person is having some fever, they don't celebrate that you have a fever, right? So generally, birth is, even though Janma, birth is classified as one of the sufferings, and it is true to some extent, right? Because the mother undergoes some suffering during the process of childbirth, and even the baby also undergoes suffering, right? So suffering is there, for sure. But that suffering is mixed with a lot of joy. That is why, even though there is suffering in the birth, it is generally not perceived as true suffering. And that is why, people, so immediately after the marriage, even the people encourage to have children, right? Even though it's suffering, then why do you encourage having children, knowing that there is suffering? And sometimes it so happens that the mother, during the time of delivery, if there is any complication, she can even, leave the body, or have like a lifelong impact that comes from the childbirth. So yes, there is suffering, but however, the birth is generally not perceived as some kind of a suffering. Because the way Kapila is describing the birth over here is some kind of like a hellish condition, right? That's how he's describing the condition of a child inside the womb of the mother. And the analogy is given to worms. Am I pronouncing it? Worms, right? Yeah. Am I pronouncing it right? Worms. Worms, right? Yeah. So, and if you tell that this baby is like a worm, it's like an insult, right? Why would you compare a newborn baby to a worm? Worm is something like it's like a filthy thing. It's like a undesirable insect. And here the comparison is the baby is compared to a worm. That kind of like a bit discouraging, right? But and even when you see when the child is born, when the child, when it comes out of the womb, it is covered with all types of bodily fluids, or sometimes even blood. It's not a pleasant situation the baby is situated when it is taken birth. And after it is taken birth, the nurse, whoever it is, they wipe down the baby and they make it clean. And of course, when there is a childbirth, even the husband sometimes are even allowed to see the child's birth. In the US especially, the husband is allowed to see during the time of delivery. But of course in India they don't allow it, but in the US they allow it. So because the child brings a lot of joy, this childbirth is not really seen as some kind of a suffering. And there is a deep attachment. There's a deep attachment between the parents and the child which is born. And this deep attachment actually continues even after the child is born also. It's like a lifelong attachment a person has, especially towards one's own children. There is a pastime in Mahabharata, where there is a Khandava Dahan, the burning of the forest called Khandava. Khandava is the name of a forest, and there is a pastime where the fire demigod, the Agni Dev, he devours the forest of Khandava, and he takes the help of Krishna and Arjuna in this process. There's an entire pastime why he wants to devour the forest, but the thing is that the Khandava is a big forest, and the Agni takes the help of Krishna and Arjuna to devour this forest. And during this process, all the animals in the forest, they are all burned down, including all the trees. And it's a ghastly description how this forest fire happened. And all the animals dies in this forest fire except for few, because there is a pastime between why those few of the animals and some sages living in the forest were spared. And there is a story that there is this bird called Saranga, the Saranga bird. There are 4 birds. They are also spared. Arjuna spares those 4 birds from getting burned down. And there is a story in this regards. It's an imaginative story. It's not necessarily a true story, but a poet got inspired by this burning of the forest fire, and then he wrote a story of these birds, the Saranga birds. And this bird requests Arjuna that, my dear Arjuna, that we are able to fly away from this forest and we are able to save ourselves, but our children are still in the forest and they are not able to fly. And please make sure that you can kill everybody, but please make sure that you save my children. And because of this request, Arjuna agrees to save these birds. And but Arjuna asked the question that, how do I know that this bird is your child? There are so many birds in the forest, right? How do I know that this is your child? Then the mother bird says that, if you come across a child which is the most beautiful child, that is my child. And he says that my child is in so and so part of the forest, and when you are burning that part of the forest, if you see a beautiful child, that is my child, please don't burn that child. And Arjuna says, okay, no problem. And the forest fire goes on for 14 days. No, Agni is burning, but Arjuna is supervising. Yeah, so he takes the help of Arjuna and Krishna. They both were there. And the forest fire, it goes on for 14 days. And unfortunately, these children, they also get burnt in the forest fire. And when the mother bird comes to know about that, then the bird becomes very angry and goes to Arjuna that, you made me a promise that you won't burn my children, but you broke your promise. How can you do like this, right? Then Arjuna says that, I don't remember seeing any beautiful birds in the forest. I mean, I just saw maybe some ugly looking whatever birds, and I thought that I don't think that they are your children. Then there's a long conversation between the mother and the Arjuna. Basically, the moral is that every parent sees their child as the most beautiful child, right? Others may not see it, that there's a most beautiful child, but for a mother, because of the attachment towards to the children, they don't see as their child is not beautiful, because of the attachment, a deep attachment a parent has towards a child. Similarly, in this childbirth also, even though this whole description of the childbirth is kind of a ghastly or not so pleasant to see, hear, but people still don't see this as some kind of a suffering because of the deep attachment one has towards one's children. And this we can also see in the case of Dhritarashtra also, right? How he is so attached to his children that he became blinded, even following in one's own dharma. It's not that he does not know what is dharma, he knows it, but still, because of this deep attachment one has towards his children, he could not discriminate, he could not take a proper decision. However, in this regards, there is another example also given by Narada Muni when he was talking to Maharaj Yudhishthir. He gives the example of Bharat Maharaj. If you see Bharat Maharaj, when he retired, actually Bharat Maharaj has 9 children or 9 sons. But however, these 9 sons, Bharat Maharaj felt that they are not qualified to take the position of a kingship. So even though he had 9 children, which he could have passed on his throne, but because knowing that they are not qualified, even though he has attachment to his children, but he did not appoint any of his sons to become the next king. Instead, Bharat Maharaj has chosen the son of sage Bharadwaj. He became the king after King Bharata. So Narada Muni basically says that how even though a person has a deep attachment to his family, but when following dharma, one has to give up one's attachments and do what is more needful. Right? And because that's not the case in the case of Dhritarashtra, because of the attachment, he wants his son to become the king. So that is why, by reading these pastimes given by Kapila, which it basically shows the naked truth. That's what Prabhupada sometimes use the word, right? Naked truth of life. Because what happens is that when we are having these deep attachments, we won't have a proper discrimination, or we won't be able to judge what is right and what is wrong, because we are deeply influenced by these material attachments, and especially the attachment to one's own child. That is much more deeper and much more stronger. But however, by seeing the reality, the truth as it is, we may develop some kind of what do you say, not making decisions based upon raga and dvesha, because raga and dvesha is the root cause of our attachment, the love and hatred. And this raga and dvesha is mainly based on the bodily relationships, and it is very natural, because it is very natural for a parent to have attachment to one's own children, and not only that, but also to one's own family, right? And I heard somewhere Prabhupada say that a man, the husband, should think that his wife is the best wife, or right? Or the wife should think that her husband is the best husband. That should be there, because without that attachment, then there cannot be any proper relationship. So, but otherwise, if you say that I like my wife, but not 100%, maybe 99% I like, but 1% I like some other woman. What do you think? Do you think that it will sustain? No, right? So, one has to, it is natural to have the attachment to one's own, family, children, and wife. But however, one should not be blinded or deeply attached to an extent where one becomes blinded in following one's own dharma, as in the case of Dhritarashtra, right? But whereas in the case of Bharat Maharaj, we see that even though he had 9 children, and even though he had attachment to his 9 children, but he was able to discriminate and follow the dharma, that these children, even though they're my children, they're not qualified to take the kingship, and he offered the kingship to the son of sage Bharadwaj. But however, we must always keep in mind that even though we read these pastimes and come across these descriptions which are ghastly, that as a devotee, we must also at the same time not develop excessive disgust, right? Because sometimes we come across such pastimes, and we do mention that this body is nothing but blood, urine, stool, and all those filthy substances. Those things are good, but however, that is where Srila Rupa Goswami mentions in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that for a bhakti yogi, excessive disgust is not healthy, right? So what happens with excessive disgust? What happens with when a person develops excessive disgust and excessive renunciation? What happens? Is mentioned in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Yeah, so the exact reason given here is that a person becomes hard-hearted. When a person becomes hard-hearted, then that person does not become qualified to practice bhakti yoga. He becomes more qualified to practice jnana yoga, not bhakti yoga. For a bhakti yogi, a person should not be excessively disgust, or a person should not be excessively attached to one's material relationships. That is very important. Because we see there are so many rasas in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. We study so many of rasas, like there are 5 primary rasas, right? And also we have the other rasas like joy, fear, anger, and the separation, and all those things. So these feelings and emotions, they are present in the material world, and they are also present in the spiritual world. But there is one feeling or one rasa which is only in the material world. It is not in the spiritual world. Can you tell me what rasa is that? Or what kind of feeling is that? Exactly, disgust. It's called jugupsa. I think, I'm not sure, it's jugupso or something like that. Basically, it's a feeling of disgust. This feeling of disgust is actually not in the spiritual world. Rest all other rasas, they are present both in the spiritual world and material world, but the feeling of disgust is not in the spiritual world. That is mentioned in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as well. So anyway, so coming back to this current verse, and here it is mentioned here that like the worms born of the same filthy abdominal cavity, he cannot remain in one place. And the word here is used is sodaraḥ. Actually, sodara means, it can have 2 meanings, because sodara means brother. Sodara is in Hindi you call Sodara. Sodara means brother. But if you split this word, sa-udaraḥ, if you go back to the word-to-word meaning, in the verse it is given sodaraḥ, but if you go back to the synonyms, it is split as sa-udaraḥ. Sa-udaraḥ. Udara means what? Udara means stomach or womb. Sa means same. So it can have 2 meanings. Sa-udaraḥ means person born from the same womb is called as sodaraḥ. Means they are brothers. And here the analogy is given to, not an analogy, but it is mentioned here because this udaraḥ, womb, is also filled with lot of worms, and they also come out along with the child, right? So that means that they are brothers, right? In one sense. So, and Prabhupada in the purport, he mentions that, what does he say here? He says, we are very anxious to establish universal brotherhood among human beings, but we should take into consideration that even the worms are our brothers, what to speak of other living entities. Therefore, we should be concerned about all living entities. So this is the principle of universal brotherhood or Pandita Samadarshana. This principle of Pandita Samadarshana is mentioned in many places, and this is just one place where Prabhupada took opportunity to emphasize this principle of Pandita Samadarshana, that having equal vision of all living entities, and establishing the universal brotherhood. Because generally people develop raga and dvesha, or love and hatred, primarily based on the bodily relationships, right? Because if you think that this is mine, then I like it. If this is not mine, then I hate it. It is basically based on the bodily relationship. But however, if we find one commonality which we can through which we can unite all living entities, right? Then there is a possibility for this universal brotherhood. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned on the platform of soul, right? Because the soul is present in all living entities, and the soul is part and parcel of Krishna. So that can be a principle we can use to establish this universal brotherhood or Pandita Samadarshana on the level of soul. But here on the level of body also, there is a commonality. What is a commonality? Because it's given here, right? Because even they are also nourished and born from the same womb of the mother. So we must treat even the worms as our brothers. I don't think that anybody thinks of it like that, but at least here it is emphasized. But the principle is that that one has to develop this equal vision and not develop the, raga and dvesha, excessive raga and dvesha towards other living entities. And that is one of the qualities of especially a spiritualist. A person who is practicing spirituality should develop this quality of Pandita Samadarshinaha, because that shows the equal vision, or the vision where one sees not differentiate based upon the body, but sees Krishna being present in everybody's heart as Paramatma, and every living entity as part and parcels of Krishna. Yeah, I'd like to end my class here. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Okay.
You mentioned, Srila Prabhupada said that the husband and wife should see their spouses the best. Can you give a reference for that, please?
I can find it. I don't know exact reference, but okay.
Every husband has the right to think of his wife as the most beautiful.
Correct. Yeah.
Now I don't know if that was meant to be taken on the same level as like Dehino Smenyata or something like that, but
right.
He did say it in a lecture.
Yeah.
He also mentioned about what was the other thing? Padma Lochan. About the mother seeing the child as Padma Lochan. Prabhupada in a lecture was saying that a child is born blind, but the mother names him Padma Lochan,
Okay.
which means beautiful eyes.
Okay.
So it's like
Right.
it's some concession there for the human feeling.
Correct.
I think
Yeah.
maybe that's along the lines,
Right.
even with the thing with the husband and the
Yeah.
wife. It's not like a shastric truth,
Yeah,
eternal truth. It's
that's
just
a human emotions
Yeah.
and feelings. I mean,
Right, human feeling.
Yeah.
an allowance for human feeling within.
Correct. Yes,
The
and that's
culture.
required for a healthy relationship also.
Mm.
You want to ask a question?
I was reflecting that as a practitioner of Krishna consciousness, we hear many times the word attachment, or have to get detached.
Correct.
And it requires a level of very higher mature understanding, and more than that, probably it's like a blessing from Krishna to actually to be able to, because theoretically we might know that, I don't supposed to be attached, and you hear this every day, you still have that. And that reminds me the prayers of Lord of the Queen Kunti, where she's actually praying that the Vrishnis and the Pandavas,
Right.
like she doesn't want to be attached to them, because that will be
Yeah.
probably an impediment to Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, that is true. So, the way we deal with attachment, especially on the path of Bhakti Yoga, because, everybody is trying to give up attachment. Even the Jnana Yogi is also trying to give up attachment, right? So, even we are Bhakti Yogis. So, how do we develop attachment? So, our renunciation, our principle of detachment is based on the principle of Yukta Vairagya. That is what Rupa Goswami gives in Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu. Because renunciation is good. Renunciation is the thing which everybody has to achieve. But how do we achieve that is different for different yogis. For a Bhakti Yogi, we follow the principle of Yukta Vairagya. Right? So what happens is that, for a Jnana Yogi, for example, if you want to practice the path of Jnana, right? The first thing you're supposed to do is that you're supposed to take sannyas. You cannot be a Jnana Yogi without being a sannyasi. Just like, for example, if you look at the Shankaracharya's disciples, you cannot be a disciple of Shankaracharya if you're not a sannyasi. He will never accept you as a disciple, because they follow the path of Jnana. That's how they practice renunciation. But in the path of Bhakti Yoga, we also follow renunciation, but in a little different way. And so, for example, in the sannyas ashram, what happens is that you are supposed to give up your wife and child and just move on. You are supposed to even change the place. You cannot even stay within the same family, right? But in the Bhakti Yoga, what happens is that there's a gradual transition. Because what happens is that, we don't necessarily see that this wife is serving me or this is my wife or things like that, but we develop, we see that, see the vision of that this wife and this child is also part and parcel of Krishna, right? And by me serving them, they are also devotees of Krishna. We develop that consciousness. And it is a transition. And that's how we transition. It's not that one day we suddenly give up and they just say that now I'm moving on, right? And in the Yukta Vairagya also, see, Yukta Vairagya is a very interesting topic. The reason is because in Yukta Vairagya, it is not necessarily giving up. It is also accepting what is required. Because generally in renunciation, so we all talk about giving up, right? But in Bhakti Yoga, it's not only just giving up, it's also accepting what's required also. So that is a little bit interesting because the principles are a little bit different. So for example, if you are supposed to, if you need something for your, to keep your body and, soul together to be able to properly even execute the Bhakti Yoga process, then there's nothing wrong in accepting that. You see what I'm saying? So for example, if you need a house to live a decent, to keep your body comfortable, and if that is required as a bare necessity, it's nothing wrong. But on the path of Jnana Yoga, you're not even supposed to do that. You're even just supposed to stay in the forest and just depend on the nature for the shelter, which is a little bit extreme. So sometimes we should not mix these two things. We should not mix the principles from the Jnana Yoga and mix it in Bhakti Yoga and get confused.
Could you take that off? Let's make it expand.
Okay. Should I speak now? Maybe it's just louder. That's it. If I remove it, right?
Just want to see if it removes the distortion.
Okay. Is it better now? No, it's same. Okay. Yeah, you want to say?
Prabhu, yeah, I just want to say that I don't know if I should ask this question, but I try to understand this about, you say no mixing, Bhakti Yoga with Jnana Yoga.
Correct.
How do we place because we're talking about Dharma anyway, Dharma also is involved. Right. The story of the king, what's his name? King Nabi? Or the king who ordered his son to kill his own mother, his wife.
That is
Jamadagni, I'm sorry.
Jamadagni.
And Dharma is involved because he's following the order of the father.
Yes.
It's not Bhakti Yoga. And there's attachment by the son, and then there's a promise that nothing is going to be wrong.
So see, that promise is for his father, but our promise is to our spiritual master, you see. So we follow Dharma as it is mentioned. That is why the Guru becomes important, right? Because a Guru is the one who will tell us what his disciple should be following, and how his disciple should be following Dharma. Otherwise, we read a pastime, but how I should follow that, we cannot just, because then that we have to go to our spiritual master, because that is where the spiritual master becomes important, even more important for Bhakti Yoga. Because just because of that pastime, now we cannot imitate that pastime, right? Because for him, the father is the authority, and he has to hear to his father, right? And he has done in a certain way. And I'm sure there are its own reasons. I'm sure if you read the purports of that pastimes, we may get a better clarity. But for us, our promise is to our spiritual master, and our commitment is to our spiritual master. And he will tell us how to follow Dharma in our situation. Thank you very much. And Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.